Mark is an MLAS candidate at Western University and presently on a co-op appointment at Wilfrid Laurier University Library. Mark's interest in academic librarianship developed while completing a PhD in the Faculty of Education at Simon Fraser University. For his dissertation, Mark took the position that to provide equitable K-12 education, it is necessary for educators and educational researchers to understand how the curriculum the federal government develops for its own employees contributes to creating an equitable society. Mark co-founded the peer-reviewed open access journal, the SFU Educational Review, has served on the board of directors for the BC Freedom of Information and Privacy Association, and recently received an appointment to the editorial team for Partnership, the Canadian Journal of Library and Information Practice and Research. Mark's career goal is to work in an academic library providing innovative and enduring services to researchers and students. Welcome, Mark.
Sociologist Andrew Abbott asks us to think of librarianship as an evolving profession. In this presentation, I hope to awaken an imagination to consider a direction in which academic librarianship might advance. In 1965, only 0.4% of the world's population had a right to access information held by their government. By the end of 2012, approximately 79% of the world's 7 billion people had this right. So what happened? Legislative bodies around the world passed at an exponential rate freedom of information legislation. In fact, this July 7th marks the 30th anniversary that we have in terms of having rights to access information held by our federal government. For librarians around the world, access to information is a core value. According to the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, the core mission of librarians is to ensure access to information for all, for personal development, education, cultural enrichment, leisure, economic activity, and informed participation and enhancement of democracy. So it's a fair question for administrators, students, faculty, and society to ask us, how are academic libraries bringing the benefits of freedom of information legislation to our communities? By the end of this paper presentation, I hope to have provided concrete suggestions that ignite our imaginations to answer this question specifically. Now, however, when discussing how libraries can bring the benefits of freedom of information legislation to communities, two responses can create barriers. And to explain them, let me turn to ancient Greece. In Greek mythology, Scylla and Charybdis are monsters on the either side of a narrow passage. Scylla is a savage, six-headed sea creature, and Charybdis is an underwater monster that creates massive whirlpools. If a vessel approaches Scylla too closely, they risk if a vessel avoids Scylla, it risks being pulled into Charybdis. If it avoids Charybdis, it risks facing the six heads of Scylla. The myth, then, is about situations where avoiding one danger exposes one to another. Now, I claim that two common responses that come up when discussing using freedom of information legislation creates an illusion of putting academic libraries between Scylla and Charybdis. Now, the first response is to become timid and not use our access rights. And this response sounds like this. Well, I'll use it as a method of last resort, or I don't need to use it. But access to information is a core value of libraries and librarians. And if we don't live up to our values, we will disappoint society and drift into the abyss. So to avoid this, do we commit to our values zealously and use the Access to Information Act zealously? Unfortunately, I do think that there are circumstances where people would unjustly hinder or harm us for using our access rights. The second response, hubris, ignores the risks and sails us into Scylla. So what do? If we don't use freedom of information legislation, we don't live up to our values, and so fail society. If we use the Act without submission, at some point we will face OCULA. But we are only caught between OCULA and Charybdis if we think that the passage is narrow. I'm going to argue that the passage is actually wider, and that the waters can safely hold a fleet of academic library projects that produce value for academic communities. I'm going to use an example. But first, let's have a quiz. Which of the following has used freedom of information legislation? A, the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. B, the Canadian Association of University Teachers. C, Library of Parliament. Or D, the Library of Natural Resources Canada. So lock in your answers. The answer is they all have. CARL to acquire information from Industry Canada and Canadian Heritage, the CAUT to acquire information from LAC, the Library of Parliament to acquire information from Industry Canada, and the NRC Library to acquire information from the Natural Science Foundation in the United States. So libraries and librarians have already traveled these waters. Let's learn from one example. The Library of Parliament. The Library of Parliament used the Access to Information Act to acquire reviews of foreign investments conducted by Industry Canada for an unnamed client, presumably a senator or a member of the House of Commons. The documents consisted of 40,000 pages that filled an entire boardroom. So following this example, academic libraries could provide a service of acquiring information their communities need. But are academic communities pursuing information through freedom of information legislation? This list shows public universities in the United States that use the Freedom of Information Act to acquire documents from the National Science Foundation. And what we can ask is, could the academic libraries be providing a service of acquiring that information? Another acquisition service we could provide follows a new policy that requires federal departments to post on their websites summaries of what people have been ordering through the Access to Information Act, as seen in this slide here. So now liaison librarians can browse what people have been ordering and provide a document delivery service for faculty. So for example, a political science librarian could acquire already released documents from the Privy Council office and give them to faculty members in the political science department. That could easily be done as of today. We could extend this idea into collection development. Now, I'm currently working on a project to build a collection of documents about copyright reform that Industry Canada and Canadian Heritage provided through the Access to Information Act. So I use DSpace, which is an institutional repository software, to store the documents. And this could be a model for other libraries' collections. So for example, this is the completed ATIs from Environment Canada. So what we could have is we could have an academic library support an environmental studies program by building a collection of documents Environment Canada has already released through the Access to Information Act. These are very easy to access. Additionally, academic libraries could also teach faculty and graduate students about using freedom of information legislation in academic research. This book is published by the University College of London in the United Kingdom, and it's a guide for academic researchers, and it develops information literacy skills around freedom of information legislation in the context of academic research. So to conclude, the one message I want you to take home is that there is a great span between being timid and being zealous. The passage is wide, the waters are safe, this new world that we're barely in is dreaming of us. Thank you.